Welcome to Small Practice Support Information Session number 12. In this Law Society of Ireland recording, David Prendergast talks to Justin Purcell about cybersecurity and data security.
You're very welcome, everybody, to Small Practice Information Session 12. I'm here with Dave Prendergast from BH Consulting, and today we're discussing cybersecurity risks for small practices. So I think there's a huge number of risks and challenges out there around data security, and it seems to be changing on a daily basis. I know we're in really good hands here today with Dave, and he's going to give us a really good sort of background knowledge as to what might happen, and then more importantly, what steps are we going to take to try and prevent some of the changes. So Dave, you're very welcome to this Law Society webinar number 12, and I hand it over to you. So if anybody wants to ask a question, we're taking them on chat, and we really appreciate anyone who wants to contribute.
So, hi everyone. Can you hear me okay? Starting for 10. Thanks to the Law Society, Justin, for the opportunity to talk to you today. We're going to talk about cybersecurity risks for small legal practices, and that's the agenda I'm planning to cover. I think we might have a little bit of time at the end if anyone has any questions, but if not, I'm happy to be contacted afterwards, and I've got details in one of the slides towards the end. So without further ado, I work for BH Consulting, which is an independent consulting firm providing market-leading range of Infosec services focused on GDPR and cybersecurity. Our understanding of the real issues impacting all ranges of industries and organizations has been reflected in earning our clients' trust based on our expertise, unparalleled experience, and a proven track record. And I'll share, as I said, I'll share contact details with you at the end if we can help you or your businesses in any way. I'm David Prendergast, or Dave if you prefer. Please feel free to stop me at any time if you can't understand my strong Leash accent. I do a version of this with subtitles. As some of the more discerning among you may have noticed, I'm not a native, but originally here from the northeast of England, but now settled here in Ireland. I've been with BH Consulting for a couple of years now, but before that had a proper job, mostly working in various banks here in Ireland, but also previously worked for IBM up at the campus in Dublin 15. And before that, I worked for a small brewery called Guinness in London, when they used to operate out of there.
So Dave, have you always worked in cybersecurity?
I worked in IT before that, so 20 odd years in. I obviously started at very young, but no, I was in IT before that. So, but more than 20 in security specifically. So we'll move on to breaches, data breaches, or Infosec breaches. This is an original quote from the CEO of Cisco, John Chambers, who said there's two types of companies: those who have been hacked and those who don't know they've been hacked. It's been taken and modified by Robert Mueller, the former director of the FBI, a great friend of Mr. Trump. We don't have to look very far to see the consequences of a breach. At the top here, a fifth of law firms show signs of compromise. This is from a survey by a company called Blue Voyant, pulled from thousands of law firms earlier this year between January and March to compile a report called The State of Cybersecurity in the Legal Sector. It's a US based, but it picks up on the legal profession specifically. We've seen breaches from the Panama Papers, 11.5 million documents linked to tax avoidance or tax evasion. Another one down here, there was the Paradise Papers, which was over 13 million documents from clients in a Bermuda law firm called Appleby, included a couple of Irish well-known names, including Bono, Dennis O'Brien, and the cast of Mrs. Brown's Boys. DLA Piper got hit badly by the NotPetya ransomware back in 2017 as well. Nearly shut down the business, causing enormous damage in direct and indirect costs. Further down,
we're getting a few concerns there about the sound quality. So maybe if you just move your microphone up and just make sure it's, yeah, thank you.
Absolutely, sure. Is that any better?
Yeah, I can hear you fine, but somebody's
Okay.
just, yeah.
That'll be the leash accent. Okay. The 9/11 Papers attack was also an attack on a legal firm by a hacking group known as the Dark Overlord, who stole data from several law firms and threatened to release it about embarrassing projects after 9/11. Over on the right, we've got this is from earlier this year, a large media and entertainment law firm resulted in 756 gigabytes of data, including contracts, non-disclosure agreements, phone numbers, email addresses, and personal correspondence. There's also a report of 190 law firms. This is from a UK software company. Reported that 190 law firms' data was breached through an unsecure online database. And the story at the bottom there, Ireland has the second highest per capita number of data breaches from a report last year from the Data Protection Commission. Puts it just behind the Netherlands. So what exactly are the threats we face? Well, not only are law firms a massive and important line of business, but they also provide services essential for our country to function, maintaining justice and economic order. At the same time, given their IT systems house huge volumes of personal information, as well as sensitive corporate data, law firms are very attractive targets for cyber criminal networks. Evidence suggests high volumes of attacks against law firms on a daily basis, and these attacks might be highly targeted. Criminals steal and abuse login credentials, probe for network vulnerabilities using anonymizing and proxy tools, and make use of persistent advanced tactics in order to crack law firms around the world. It's also worth noting that the online world is 24/7, so just because you're at home tucked up in bed, someone somewhere in the world may be trying to access your systems and data.
So Dave, are you seeing anybody trying to misrepresent law firms at the moment? Like, has that been an issue for companies?
We've seen there's a lot of spoofing, so email spoofing, and I've got on there something around people trying to get access to your information, criminals looking for sensitive information, claiming to be somebody else, journalists as well, posing to be journalists, looking for specific information on clients. So we've certainly seen that. And there's technical ways of spoofing as well. It's very easy to spoof an email. So I could quite comfortably send an email to pretend to work for the Law Society. And we have to look out for these things. So the consequences are you might be lucky, and I use that term loosely, and just lose a sum of money. The cleanup costs can be significant in terms of hiring experts to investigate a breach, especially if you want to pursue court action. Then additional costs to restore or fix your IT systems, and you might need a new or upgraded IT system at that point. As you now, and because you're now a viable target, your monitoring costs will certainly increase. Your insurance costs are going to go up. And just to top that, you might be subject to fines and other sanctions from the DPC, for example. And then, of course, you might face litigation from many clients if it's their data that's lost. So just think about what that might do for your reputation and future business. Only this week, there was a press release issued by An Garda Síochána in relation to invoice redirection fraud, otherwise referred to as CEO fraud or CFO fraud. This is a company based in Dublin. This particular example and the notice was about a particular company in Dublin that were subject to, they were victim of a fraudulent redirection of 2.1 million payment. Thankfully, in this case, it looks like the payment was stopped in Hong Kong and the money is being recovered. In BH Consulting, we've seen real life examples in the past few months where organizations have had their email systems, either Office 365 or Gmail, breached by a phishing attack. The criminals have then changed the email settings so that all email is then forwarded to an external address without the client's knowledge. They've then waited for a payment to be due before contacting to advise a change in account details. So they've contacted the client and said, yeah, it's Dave here from BH Consulting. We've changed our bank account details, here they are, and they've successfully stolen money from Irish businesses. And we've we've certainly seen, we've gained clients on the back of that because people have contacted us to say, this has happened, can you help us out?
So apparently that's a classic one that happens on what they call Friday phishing, when some legal deals or conveyancing deals are due to close on a Friday generally, and they seek out these specific transactions at that time period. You're probably going to talk about this later, but what types of steps can a small business or a small practice take to mitigate against that?
That's exactly where we're going now. Here's what we should be doing. Here's some examples of what we should be doing to prevent that. Some of these are basic. They don't cost any money. So this is cybersecurity is all too often thought of as an IT issue rather than a strategic risk management issue it actually is. If you don't protect your highly sensitive client information, your whole practice might be in jeopardy. So what should you do to counter the threat? Well, this is a good starting guide from Ireland's NCSC, that's the National Cybersecurity Centre. This is an operational arm of the Department of Communications. It's responsible for advising government, IT, and critical national infrastructure providers around threats and vulnerabilities. I'll provide a link to this paper and the other links that we talk about or have referenced here afterwards, in case anyone's particularly interested. But it's a nice bunch of steps to talk about establishing governance, identifying what's important, where you could possibly lose your information, or looking at all the possible places you could lose it. And there's also great advice on the Law Society website, which I've got a link to at the bottom there. And again, I'll share that afterwards.
Yeah, just to underline that, there's a really comprehensive cybersecurity link there at the bottom on the Law Society website, which kind of gives you a number of steps around what we're discussing today, and some steps you might take around reporting if you've been a victim of a crime or a victim of an attack. So I'd recommend that you check out that site. So there are resources here within the Law Society that can assist.
Help is out there. So don't think you're on your own with this. It might be a little bit daunting and some of the jargon that we might use and all that kind of stuff, but help is out there.
Yeah, because it can be slightly confusing, the difference between phishing, spoofing, smishing, spear attacks, etc., that it's very difficult to kind of keep up to speed on all of the different sort of remedies or preventative actions you need to be taking.
It is, and I'll talk a little bit about that. We don't need you to become IT or security experts, but there are some basic steps you can take. So this is what to do. From a privacy perspective, put simply, if you've got a secret, don't put it on a computer. But obviously that's not possible. But where you do, make sure you protect it. But you have to keep checking that it's protected as well. And they say the only secure computer is one that's switched off and disconnected. But the fact that I can contact you or call you and I might persuade you to switch it on and plug it in makes even that untrue. A lot of detail on this slide, and I will include these in a paper afterwards. But security broadly is about people, process, and technology. Almost every security or data breach involves some level of social engineering. That's where an attacker looks to con or trick a person rather than your system. So whether it's via a phishing attack, so they're conning you by email, whether it's by phone or by text, but they're looking to con you to do something. Quite often starts as phishing, where someone clicks on a link in an email, and that's what happened with the email attacks I talked about earlier, the ones that we've seen, where somebody's compromised their whole email account by sending a phishing link. It could be being persuaded to open a door or permit access to a building, or maybe even give away a password. We need technical controls to stop bad things coming in. Your antivirus products, all those lovely technical things, the tools and software to do that. We need good user awareness from our people, not to open infected attachments, clicking on links, but also what to do if they do that. Not to shoot the messenger here. We need you to understand what you're supposed to do next. So that's good process, having plans and procedures in place for when that doesn't work. And it doesn't include shooting the person who told you. And having a good backup strategy to recover from, and business continuity plans when it's actually a bigger deal.
So it appears that vigilance on behalf of the staff members is the first sort of line of defense nearly in
Always.
That if something seems out of the ordinary or unusual, that you don't be afraid to stop it or not perform the task that's been requested and double check.
The key thing is to get people to be, I refer to myself as a cynical optimist. We need people to be skeptical. So I want to believe you. I want that email to be correct. I'm just not sure, so I'm going to check it out first. And even doing simple things like checking with your colleagues. Does this look strange to you? Does this look odd? This payment, especially if somebody tells you it's got to be covert, you're not to tell the boss. Really? In what world does that happen? Where this is so secret, you're not to tell the boss or to tell the CFO. It's just not plausible. It's often stated in a lot of security things that you're the weakest link. I'm trying to get away from that because we need to do more in technology to try and stop these things coming in. So I'd encourage you all, if you're using a third party to manage your IT and security, make them work for their money. Don't be just another client. Check that they've reviewed the security of your email and other systems, other IT systems, and they're conducting regular checks. Have regular monthly meetings with them, check everything's up to date, and have standard reporting and an agreed reporting or escalation structure. So you get told quickly if something does go wrong. That's very, very important, because otherwise, how do you know that don't assume they're doing their job. Don't assume you're their best client. You could be just any one of a number of them, and they might miss a breach. So you really have to make them work for their money.
And Dave, not to put you on the spot, but like, let's say I'm a small practitioner and I don't have a third-party IT support. Like,
yeah.
What should I be doing? Like, should I rely on the 365 virus protection on my laptop, or like, are there what sort of tips would you give there?
So there's a bunch of controls there. Have a look at security across your whole ecosystem's a fancy word, but across the network, anywhere where you could lose information, IT systems, email, cloud services, PCs and laptops, your mobile devices, use of personal devices, and removable media. And you've got to look at all of those and how each of those is protected, but don't assume that the default config or setup is secure. Something like Office 365, for example, has a great little self-assessment tool built in that you can run. It doesn't cause any damage. It just runs in the background. You need to be the administrator to run it. But it gives you a score. It's a weird score of something like it's something like 478 or some weird scoring like that. But you can increase your score. It's up to you whether you want to increase it. But if you do something like apply multi-factor authentication, that's where you get a text message to say that you've logged in from an unusual place. You know, if you're logging in on your mobile instead of on your laptop, it'll text you and say, was that really you? Put the code in.
Like an authenticator.
Yeah, it is. It's quirky, it's horrible, it's clunky. We don't like it. But you know what? I'll put up with it if it stops the bad guy stealing my money, right? If you apply that, it massively decreases the risk and increases your score in Office 365. If you apply encryption, same again, it adds to your score. If you kill off that auto forwarding of email, again, it increases your score. And it gives you all the hints and tips you need to tell you how to protect your email system. So don't accept the default. Yeah. Unfortunately, there's a lot of IT out there. So there's a lot of, that's for your email. And then you've got to look at your mobile devices and your cloud systems. Again,
what about Dropbox or OneDrive or just basic email as a way of sharing confidential documents? How risky is that?
Extremely. If it's not protected, if it's not encrypted when you put it in there, then somebody can access it. I know that the guys in Dropbox, for example, are not to slight them, but if you don't encrypt the data before you put it in Dropbox, somebody in Dropbox could potentially access it. So if Dropbox get hacked or they have a rogue employee, somebody could access your data. So and
when you say
your
encryption,
client, go on.
When you say encryption, does that mean like doing a WinZip on it, or is there additional tools you should be using to do that?
WinZip's fine as long as WinZip is generally there to compress a file. There is an encryption option in there, so make sure you use the right option in WinZip. But that's fine. It's encrypting it so that only you have the key, the password. And I get away from this not writing passwords down thing. There's so many systems. use a password manager. If you need to write a password down for encrypted files like that, then write them down. Just don't leave it near the computer. Write them, put them somewhere safe, not next to the device, not next to your system. Okay, but yeah, you use WinZip is fine before you load it into Dropbox, and then you phone somebody up and tell them what the password is in separately. You know, you don't send this password in the same email.
What about, just a quick question there, Dave, what about password protected Word documents? How do you feel about them?
Fine, so if you're on the later versions of Microsoft Word, for example, and Excel, they all have a little option in there. If you click on the file option, you can go down, you can encrypt your documents as you're creating them. I'm not sure, Google Docs probably has the same thing. I'm not that familiar with it. Not as familiar, I should say. But password's good. Encrypting it is better. You still need a password to decrypt it, but you can hack a password. You can't. It's much more difficult to hack it if it's encrypted. It puts an algorithm around to mix it all up, so that you absolutely need that password. It's much harder to crack, essentially. Is that okay?
Yep. So if there's any other questions out there from any of the other people that you want to ask them, happy to take them.
So have plans in place when things go wrong, or expect that things will go wrong. Assume that ransomware will at some point infect your systems. Make sure your data, your essential data to run your company, is backed up and offline so that it doesn't become infected if everything else does. You've got to regularly test that your backups are working and recoverable, or get your IT guys to do it and confirm it. Develop and document plans on what you do if and when you are breached, including who you talk to, who you communicate to. I'm fed up with seeing people saying contact, you know, if something goes wrong, contact the regulator. Great, which one? What's their phone number? What's their contact details? Put some meat on the bones. And what would you tell? You can write an email or your communications now in what you would tell your shareholders, your clients, your staff. You can draft something up now, and there's examples of good and bad practice out there that you can have as drafts. When you're in the middle of a crisis, you don't want to be sitting saying, "Now, have I got this wording right? Have I missed anyone?" If you pre-think that, that's much better. You're much better place. And run some tabletop exercises. You know, what would happen? See how prepared you'd actually be. Who are you going to call? Would you, you know, if things do go badly wrong, who are you going to phone? Do you have their phone number? Do you have them on a retainer? Would you actually pay the ransom? And under what circumstances would you pay a ransom? There's a great site here, IRISS. It's a public free site. It's got a lot of good resources in there. They might be a good source for you if you do get breached, because they might be able to source decryption keys to recover your systems rather than paying out in the hope that you get your data back. And if you do decide to pay the criminals, just remember they're criminals. They might give you the keys, they might give you the data, but there's no guarantees. You're just putting more money into the criminal underworld, the dark web, as we like to call it. Or the deep web is a different one. So, you know, do your plan it beforehand. And again, I'll provide that a link to that in the information afterwards. So, takeaways: don't get breached. Make security part of your business strategy. Security, as I said before, is about people, process, and technology. Make your technology work harder, work with your people, and get your processes in place. You don't have to spend money in some of the processes. Some of the simple ones I covered before there is if somebody says, "I've changed my bank account details," pick the phone up on the number that you know. I think the example that I gave before from Angora Shikona, a fraudulent email came in with a rogue phone number on. So the client that was defrauded did actually phone up and say, "Is this really you who changed your details?" And they said, "Oh yeah, definitely, that's correct." It was a fraudulent number that they'd given them in the email. So phone somebody on the number that you already know, or go and find it elsewhere. Don't trust the email that came in. As I said, always have a plan B.
So David, just a
and
quick
if that
question.
doesn't work, maybe give us a call, or better still, do it before you get a breach. But go on, sorry, Justin.
Just somebody was looking for some tips around remote working and being cyber aware when you're remote working. What some of the pitfalls around that? Is there any things we need to, like the Zoom calls and?
Yeah, absolutely. What I'll do, we've actually put a blog post up on our website, handy enough, but I'll send a link to that. So Zoom, there was a lot of noise earlier this year, the start of the summer, about Zoom being insecure. It was a victim of its own success, to be honest. They were already a reasonably secure company, but they weren't very secure, and they had some dodgy salesman who'd said that it was encrypted when it actually wasn't. They were still working on it, and it just blew up, and everybody started using Zoom everywhere, and they kind of were playing a bit of catch up on the security side. But there are lots of options on Zoom or on Microsoft Teams or on WebEx that you can set up as part of the call. What I'd say to you, the key thing is, if you're going to use Zoom or Microsoft Teams or any of those web conferencing tools, what are you going to talk about? Are you talking about client confidential stuff? If so, put security on the call. So make sure that you know who's dialed in. This is an open call, so I presume Justin has some idea of who's dialed into it. If it's a one-to-one with a client, there should only be 2 people on that call, not 6. And you can control that if you set it up. There's a lot of other controls in all of those systems that you can control and set up. And as I said, I'll send some additional details of that.
Are you going to send on we're going to send on a briefing note of top tips around this today.
Absolutely.
So I suppose in conclusion, Dave, thank you very much for your information today. I think it's been insightful. I think we could spend a lot more time discussing some of the really. So is there any final thoughts you want to impart with the audience today?
I think it was with the last couple of slides there. Prepare for being breached. If you are breached, be prepared is the key one. So certainly make your IT guys work harder for you. Work with your staff. But if you've got a small company there, work together on it. Tell me when something doesn't look right. Try and work out what normal looks like. So when something odd comes in, encourage people to put their hand up and say, I just want to check this. Is this right? Does this seem right to you? And if you're not sure, phone the client up. Don't be pressured by a trick of social engineering is this is urgent, has to be done now. Your boss told me, and they try and give you authoritative figures to bully you and press you into doing something quickly. I would rather wait half an hour, a couple of hours, even a day, than lose money if you want to make some background checks or to pick up the phone and check, than put a payment through because it's urgent. If it's urgent, if it's genuine, it's worth checking it out.
Yeah, very good. So be vigilant. Don't take rash steps, and think about it twice. And don't be afraid to just sit on your hands, as they would say.
Be vigilant. Be safe. Be secure.
Thank you very much, Dave. Just to let everybody know, we have a revenue presentation next week on the employment wage subsidy scheme. So we have a panel and a speaker from the revenue who is going to talk specifically around the employment wage subsidy scheme as it transfers from the temporary wage subsidy. So we look forward to having you all next week, and that will run from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock. So and then beyond that, then we have the online sales and marketing tips on September the 9th, and then we have organizing professional indemnity insurance on September the 16th. So again, thank you very much, Dave. It was a pleasure having you on the show, and we look forward to speaking to you all next week about the employment wage subsidy scheme with a special presentation from the Revenue Commissioners. Thank you very much, and Slán, and have a good day.